Guys, it's tires. Cycling right now is just tire centric. Everything seems to be about tires, right? Back in the day, it used to be about weight. Weight was all that mattered. Then it was stiffness too, weight and stiffness. Every year, bikes would get a little lighter and a little stiffer. They probably still do, but really, no. Now it's like they get bigger tires every year, right? Something's got to change every year. Aero is really important too. Aero kind of comes in and out. Is it the most important thing, or is it tires, or is it weight, or is it stiffness? Right now, it's tire rolling resistance. That seems to be the thing, right? So when I was getting started into cycling in the 80s and 90s, you probably could get 28s on a lot of bikes, especially if you had the steel style bikes, older style bikes. You might fit 28s, but 25s and 23s were the tire. The 23, the 700 by 23, that was the racing tire. The 25, that was kind of a standard tire. It seemed to come on a lot of bikes. And then the 28, that was thought of as kind of like a light-duty touring tire almost. Like, I don't really remember anybody ever really using 28s. And if you saw them, you would have thought they were really out of place. Proper touring tires really were a lot bigger. They had thicker treads and maybe 32, 35 or bigger. Things got kind of weird around the turn of the century, though. I have this Cervelo R2.5 that's been banging around for a long, long time. I've used it on the trainer. That bike, you cannot even fit 25s on it. It's got to be 23s. Running 28s on most of the road bikes that I purchased and that I still own is out of the question. You might get a 28 on the back, but it almost rubs the chainstays. Like my CAD 9, my Tarmac, you really can't hardly run 28s on there unless they're just really, really tight. And then the forks will not fit a 28 at all. In fact, some bigger 25s rocks have gotten stuck up in the fork crown and made like a lot of crazy things happen. So the thing about it is it wasn't a thing because like nobody wanted big tires. We were running 23s and maybe 25s if you wanted to be slow, but the 28, who wanted it, right? Nobody wants a big, slow, heavy tire. We also knew back in the 80s, 90s that the pros were using even skinnier tubular tires like the 700 by 19s or smaller even. I never really saw anybody using those. A couple times I knew one guy who had tubulars that were like 700 by 19s, but most people weren't using those tires. Tires have changed so much. Like, I'll give you this example, the Specialized Roubaix. This was a bike designed for the rough cobblestone roads of northern France. And it was also needed to be, it was a race bike too. They didn't want a comfort bike. They wanted a race bike. So right around this time, this was 2005, Trek had come out with the Pilot series, which I remember vaguely. The Pilot series, they were all about like comfort. Like they had special bar in plugs that would supposedly make the handlebars more comfortable and remove vibrations and stuff. So it's kind of funny that comfort was becoming a thing when bikes were getting super stiff, all coming with 23 tires. But anyway, so in 2019, fast forward 14 years, the Roubaix now comes with 28s. I know in 2018, Peter Sagan won that with 43.5 kilometers an hour average speed. And now in 2025, the Roubaix comes with 32s, but if you want to, you could fit up to 40s on it. Matthew Van der Poel, won in 2025, the Paris-Roubaix, with 32 tubeless tires, and he did it at a record-breaking 47 kilometers an hour. Obviously, the big tires aren't slowing him down. In the later 2000s, I was spending a lot of my time on bike forums because I was a nerd, I had the internet, and I was spending a lot of time on these bike forums. I would see people I thought of as geezers, and they'd make posts about wider tires and how we were all throwing away free speed and comfort by riding our stupid 23s. People were saying that wide tires like Schwalbe Marathons and 700 by 32 or even 35 were faster. They had better rolling resistance. They were using cyclocross bikes and riding really long, hard miles on these bikes. And they would say, hey, look, these tires, they don't feel fast, but they are way faster on average roads. And I thought that was crazy. You see these tires and they're like big, heavy looking, touring looking tires, the Schwalbe Marathon. So I was like, no way. Somewhere in this time, I bought some 700 by 28 Clement tires at my local bike shop. They weren't expensive. I think they were probably wire beads. Most of my tires back then were wire beads. I couldn't afford the more expensive folding beaded tires. These big 28s, they look like balloon tires on the 19 millimeter Mavic rims that I had at that time, Open Pro style rims. I took them out on one of my favorite rides. It was 20 miles out and back on very smooth asphalt with a little bit of climb, a few small climbs. I felt like I was riding on like soft dirt, like my tires were flat. They felt slow. Slow uphill, slow downhill, slow to accelerate, and they made the bike feel mushy, and I really didn't like riding it. I just didn't like the feel. I took them off just after a few rides, and really those tires hung around here for a long time. I finally threw them away. So thanks to modern science and marketing, we know wider tires now are better in every way. They offer more comfort, more traction, and better rolling resistance. And they're just really barely heavier now. The wider tires of today are probably way, way better. Like a 700 by 28 Grand Prix 5000 is probably way, 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 way better than those 700 by 28s I was trying to use. But they still probably do feel a little slower compared to a 23. It's been so long since I've rode a 23, I don't even remember. It's easy to look back on the morons in their tiny tires in the 80s and 90s. But I think there was more to it, too. So you can't just totally disregard everybody in the past as being just stupid, right? So for the first few decades of the Tour de France bike race, they were racing on 700 by 32 or 700 by 38, somewhere in there. The roads were mostly unpaved. They were gravel, dirt, and cobblestone. These guys were averaging 15 miles an hour on roads, and they did twice as many hours of riding as a modern Tour de France rider. Basically, they were doing like the unbound gravel every day on rough, unpaved roads, throwing some mountains, 200 some miles. It was insane. It was almost beyond human endurance. As roads got better, and they say in the 50s, after the war especially, riders started using skinnier tires. Track bikes were the actual racing bikes of that turn of the century. I mean, that's where the racing was really taking place. I think these road races like the Tour de France before World War II especially, back then, they were more of publicity stunts. They were more like crazy endurance and tests. Road track races were running probably 1-inch tires, 1 1/8 inch tires, and they were on perfectly smooth tracks. So on that particular surface, a skinny tire pumped up to 120 pounds of pressure is going to be faster almost in all situations. So if that's going to be faster, then you might as well think, well, that probably would be better on the road too, right? Did anyone in the 50s and 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even the 2000s, did anybody even bother to test wider tires? Yeah, they did. They tested them. They put them on steel drums to test rolling resistance scientifically. And these scientific tires tests would always prove that the skinnier tires were faster. They had way lower rolling resistance. So why would you want to run anything but a skinny hard tire? Plus, if you went out and you did some rides and you took a stopwatch and you timed a section of road on some skinny tires, more than likely you're not going to notice hardly any difference. This is something that was going to probably sort of become apparent in a longer endurance ride. Like if you did happen to maybe do a full stage of the Tour de France on wider tires, but you would have had to have a bike that actually worked with those wider tires. So the bikes probably didn't work with the wider tires at the time. They couldn't fit them. It was like my Cervelo. If you want wider tires, you're out of luck. It's just not going to fit. So, I mean, people knew, I'm sure, that if they were going to race down a bumpy mountain, then the wider tire at lower pressure would be better. It'd perform better comfort, better control, probably be faster. But they were thinking, that's not where the race is going to be won. The race is going to be won climbing the mountain. I want the lightest, skinniest, fastest tire for climbing that mountain, not for rolling, bombing down it. And if I have to endure some discomfort, it's worth it. So one rider is known to have offered actual testing and evidence that wider tires were in fact better all around. A guy named Jobst Brandt, an American engineer and cyclist, he claimed in the 1980s that wider tires like 25s and 28s were better for real-world conditions. His testing showed that the high-pressure tires of the day, the 23s, 21s, and skinnier, resulted in higher rolling resistance on actual real roads. And the wider tires were more efficient and more comfortable, faster. And they also saw in his testing that tubular tires were no better. Everybody said, well, if you want to be serious, you got to get tubulars. He said they don't really perform any better. They're not any faster. They're not any lighter, really. They were no better. And he also said weight, his testing showed weight really didn't matter that much. The amount of weight we're talking about here in different tire sizes, like a couple hundred grams, really doesn't matter. But his testing and his conclusions were ignored by the racing community. They were just against tradition, and tradition was huge back then. I mean, people were riding these tiny little cassettes and doing 40 RPM up mountains because that's what had always been done, even though they could have been running wider range gears, right? Nobody wanted to be the one who did something like that because nobody wanted to break tradition and look weird or look weak. His research was also informal. It was not backed up by any big institutions or companies. It was just him doing his own testing. Most importantly, though, he bucked the systems that were in place. He dismissed the organizations. He dismissed the industry. He said they're all fools. Basically, he ended up looking like a kook to everybody because, like, if you go outside the system and demand huge changes and say everything that's been done for as long as we can remember is wrong, you're all wrong, I have the right answers, you really look kind of like an idiot, right? So I did a lot of the research for this video on ChatGPT, which, yeah, it's not always the best place, but I had never heard of Jobst Brandt before until ChatGPT mentioned him as one of the pioneers of, you know, tire and rolling resistance and stuff, and it really gave the impression that he was the father of the modern tire movement. But when I went back and kind of clarified with ChatGPT and also did a lot of my own research, I found out he wasn't. He was kind of more of the father of supple casing tires at lower air pressure. He was a big fan of using really high quality, high thread count, supple casing tires and using lower air pressure on rougher roads, and avoiding the really small, very high pressure tires. So he likes 25s, 26, 27 tires from what I can tell. I read some of his Usenet posts. There's some stuff about him on Sheldon Brown's website that's pretty good. But definitely he wasn't advocating for tires really outside of what was already kind of normal for like, you know, light duty touring at the time, 25s, 26s, 27s. And ChatGPT clarified that when I really got into it more with ChatGPT. So yeah, later more testing was done in the 2000s, and it actually told me, I forgot the guy's name, he tested wider tires, finding that they were actually producing, you know, high quality tires were producing lower rolling resistance. But Jobst Brandt did do a lot of rolling resistant tests in the 90s, from what I can tell, showing that supple casings performed really good at low pressure. They didn't need to be aired up at crazy high pressures for good rolling resistance. Sadly, Jobst Brandt, he died in 2015, and he's not around now to see that this wide equals fast trend that he was really pushing in the 1980s is completely swept the industry. It seems to be like I don't want to call it a fad because, you know, a test just came out recently. One of the magazines, I can't remember which one, or one of the outlets today, we don't really have magazines anymore, cycling whatever, said 40 is now the size. Everybody ought to be riding 40s. That would be faster. You would be happier on 40s. If we would have listened to Jobst, maybe that wouldn't, we would all already have been on 28s and 30s a long time ago, and maybe we'd be more ready for a jump to 40s right now. To me, 40 seems pretty big, but I just did a gravel ride on 45s, and I was pretty fast on these 45 gravel tires on some roads that I just rode on a road bike. So I think I was very skeptical of the super wide tires, but I'm starting to wonder about them. Anyway, thanks Jobst for trying to teach us something back then that we now know as true. See ya.